Hey guys, tonight we're diving into one of the greatest enigmas of ancient history, the sudden collapse of the Maya civilization, a vast and powerful network of city-states that once thrived in the steamy jungles of Mesoamerica, but then, one day, just seemed to vanish. As always, before we get comfortable, go ahead and like the video and subscribe, but only if you actually enjoy these journeys through time. And in the comments, tell me where you're tuning in from. It's always amazing to see where around the world people are listening to echoes from the past. Now dim the lights, maybe brew some tea, and let's journey together, deep into the heart of the rainforest, where the temples rise and the glyphs whisper stories no one was meant to forget. Congratulations. You've just been born in the city of Calakmul, a jewel of the classic Maya world. The year is somewhere around 730 AD, though no one's counting years the way you do. Your arrival is announced not with tears, but with chants. The priest lifts you up under the morning sun, reciting the sacred words of your Nahual, your spirit companion. A monkey, perhaps, or a jaguar. Already, your place in the cosmos is marked on bark paper scrolls by the royal scribes. The stars dictated your birth. The gods acknowledged it, and so the story begins. Your mother wraps you in woven cotton, hand-dyed with indigo as incense wafts through the air. Outside the plastered stone walls of your home, the city stirs. Traders with obsidian blades and cacao beans jostle through narrow causeways. Astronomers climb temple steps to greet the dawn. You don't know this yet, but you were born into greatness. A civilization obsessed with cycles, time, crops, sacrifice, stars. Everything is part of the pattern, and in that pattern, your small cry becomes another ripple in a long, calculated wave. By age 3, you've already learned the glyphs carved on your family's altar. You trace them with your finger, twisting spirals, jagged serpents, eyes that blink without pupils. They say knowledge is a gift from the gods, but you're beginning to suspect it's a burden too. Your father tells you stories at night, not about monsters, but kings. Kings who captured rivals and played the ball game to decide the fate of cities. Kings who spoke with ancestors through blood. He says you will learn the old ways. You will respect the maze. You will greet the sun. But your world is not peaceful. Already, the city feels tense. Messengers from the south bring whispers. Tikal is growing bold again. The stelae, those towering stone monuments outside the royal palace, record victories, but they do not mention the droughts. They do not mention the empty granaries. No one writes about the trees that no longer return after burning. The forest, once a willing partner in the grand ritual of civilization, is growing tired. And yet the priests still raise their knives. Still the rulers demand tribute. Still the dancers move through the plazas, their anklets clinking like the ticking of a celestial clock. By 7, you've watched your first sacrifice. A prisoner, bound in jaguar pelts, his chest painted blue. The drums beat low and hard like a heartbeat from the underworld. The priest doesn't hesitate. When the blade plunges in and the sun aligns with the temple's shadow, a cheer rises. The world, they say, has been fed. The gods are pleased, but you're not so sure. You saw the prisoner's eyes. He wasn't afraid. He looked resigned, like someone who knew this had all happened before. Because it had. The Maya didn't see time as a line. They saw it as a wheel, a spiral, a snake eating its tail. Your people measure centuries in baktuns. They name years by combinations of sacred days, and according to some, the end is always looming, always predicted. Not in fire and brimstone, but in silence. A slow unraveling of the bonds between people, nature, and gods. That unraveling has begun. You just don't know it yet. You're 10 now, and the world is louder. Not in the way of voices or laughter, but in the way stone shouts when it cracks. The plazas are still swept, the priests still burn copal on the altars, but something has shifted. The water in the reservoir is lower than you've ever seen. The rains that once pounded the earth like celestial drums now arrive late. Or not at all. Your father still walks to the temple every morning, but he moves slower. His sandals leave dust where once they left prints in the mud. The cornfields, planted in neat rows like glyphs for the gods to read, struggle in the dry soil. Maize is more than food here. It is the body of the people. When the stalks weaken, so does the soul. The elders say it's a test. The gods are listening, always. But sometimes they want to see who remembers the old songs, and so the rituals intensify. Bloodletting becomes more frequent. Nobles pierce their tongues and genitals with stingray spines, dripping offerings onto bark paper, burning it in censers to send messages skyward. Smoke rises, always rising, but the rain does not fall. Your city begins to turn inward. Where once envoys from Copan or Palenque brought gifts and news, now they bring rumors that kings are losing their grip, that rival cities are growing bolder, desperate. Tikal, the old rival, rises like a ghost from the west. Their stelae boast of new conquests, their scribes etch dates with certainty as though the heavens still smile upon them. At night you dream of collapsing temples and voices chanting names no one dares speak by daylight. Then comes the decree. Every family must send one member to assist with the grand expansion of the temple platform, not because the gods asked for it, but because the king did. He needs to be seen, now more than ever, as chosen, as blessed, as eternal. He orders new pyramids built atop the bones of the old. Cities layered like time itself, each structure another attempt to outlive the rainless sky. You go with your uncle to carry limestone blocks. The quarries are far, the sun cruel. Each day your skin darkens, your shoulders harden, but your spirit frays. On the fourth day, your uncle collapses in the heat. No one helps him. The priests say he must have been weak in the eyes of the gods. That night, you lie awake under the stars, and they no longer seem like companions. They feel like distant judges, old, cold, and unmoved by prayers. Still, the people try. They carve more glyphs. They build higher towers. They sing the songs older than the city itself. But something is breaking beneath it all, not just in the soil or the sky, but in trust. The nobles still feast. You've seen it. While children beg for a tole and the granaries echo with emptiness, the elite drink cacao thick with spice, wear feathers bright as firebirds, and debate the stars. They perform the rituals with precision, but their eyes don't glow with faith. They glow with fear. Because the worst truth is creeping through the city like a vine through stone. The gods might not be listening anymore. You hear it whispered in the market. A vendor leans in close and says that the cenotes, the sacred wells, have dried in the north, that people are abandoning the smaller towns, that roads that once teemed with travelers now echo with wind and silence. In your heart, you know what this means. The cities are unraveling, not in fire, but in thirst. And then one day the drums stop. No one says why, no one asks, but the air is different. You walk past the palace and the guards are gone. The plaza is empty. The marketplace, once a cacophony of barter and blessing, now holds only echoes and broken baskets. Your mother tells you not to speak, not to look. The king has fled, or died, or become something else. The temple bells remain silent. And all at once, the cycle feels broken. Years pass. You grow older, leaner, sharper. But so does the crisis. There is no single moment when you can say the Maya world collapsed. No explosion, no headline, no day when the city just turned to dust. It came like dusk, slow, creeping, unnoticed until the sun was gone. Cities begin to empty, not all at once, not in panic, but gradually like lungs deflating. Traders stop arriving. Messengers never return. Roads that once shimmered with the patter of sandaled feet become overgrown with vines. Entire temples remain half-built, abandoned in silence, as though even the gods grew tired of waiting. You walk the edges of your city one morning and realize there are more howler monkeys in the trees than people in the streets. The jungle is reclaiming what was once taken. Nature has no need for kings, no patience for astronomers. The vines creep over the altars, the roots buckle the stone, and still the rains do not return. In the center of the plaza, the last stela is raised, a monument to a king whose name you can barely remember. The glyphs speak of triumph, of sacrifice, of cosmic cycles aligning in favor of the realm. But the people who carved it are gone. And the king? Dead, disappeared, or perhaps just silent, like the gods he once served. The collapse is not just political, it is personal. It is a forgetting. The language once etched in jade and obsidian is now scrawled only in the minds of a few remaining scribes. The ball courts, where once entire wars were decided by the arc of a rubber ball, now lie empty, their stone rings chipped and moss-covered. The murals fade beneath the weight of moisture and time. And still, no one says the word collapse. Because to admit the end is to break the cycle. And the Maya are nothing if not believers in cycles. You and your family flee north, joining other groups, farmers, artisans, scribes, all drifting toward the coast, toward places where water still flows and the soil still bears fruit. You don't talk about Calakmul anymore. It was never defeated, only left behind. Others take different paths. Some head west, seeking safety in the mountains. Some are taken by disease. Others vanish between the trees, swallowed by the same forest that once offered sanctuary. The once mighty Maya world, a constellation of brilliant city-states stretching across hundreds of miles, becomes a scatter of embers. Some still burn, faintly, but most are ash. And yet, life continues. In a new village, built beside a muddy lagoon where the water at least doesn't taste like stone, you hear stories of cities you've never seen. Yachilan, Dos Pilas, Piedras Negras. Once rivals, now ruins. Their kings either swallowed by the jungle or consumed by their own ambition. You meet a woman whose family once served a queen. She remembers the way the court smelled, cinnamon, sweat, crushed flowers. But not the queen's name. The collapse didn't erase the Maya. It fractured them. Some still raise temples, though smaller now, humbler. The hieroglyphs lose their curves, their poetry. Some say the gods left. Others say the people simply stopped listening, but in your dreams, you see them still. Not angry, not disappointed, just silent, watching as the stars move on without ceremony. One evening, a traveling priest passes through your village. He speaks of the old cities with awe and sadness. He carries a codex, one of the few still intact. You help him repair it. As you press bark, paper, and pigment together, you ask him what really happened. Why did the great cities fall? Was it drought, war, hubris? He looks at you, tired, and says, "It wasn't one thing. It was everything, all at once, like forgetting to breathe." And for the first time, you understand. The Maya collapse wasn't a single death. It was a long exhale, a civilization that held its breath for centuries and finally let go. It's been years since you last saw a full city rise against the horizon. Now, the jungle swallows all. What were once plazas of gleaming limestone, grand palaces adorned with painted glyphs, have become mounds under moss and tree roots. You walk through what was once a ceremonial road, a sakba, now indistinguishable from the forest floor. And yet, not all is gone. You reach a village, not grand, not royal, but alive. Smoke curls from hearths. Corn grows in neat terraces on the hillside. The people speak a language you understand, but only just. Their words are older, softer, still Maya, but changed. And their gods have changed too. The great temples are gone, but small shrines remain. Offerings are made not with jade and gold, but with maize and feathers. The cosmos, after all, doesn't care what you offer, only that you remember to. The elders here tell different stories, not of kings who summoned rain, but of ancestors who listened to the land. They say the collapse came because people forgot the balance, that the kings built too high, demanded too much, that the earth cracked not from anger, but from exhaustion. You think of your childhood in Calakmul, the way the priests raised their knives under a sky that would not weep, how the royal family fed themselves on roasted meat while your neighbors dug for roots. Perhaps the gods didn't leave. Perhaps they waited and watched. One night, you sit by the fire as a young girl recites a chant. It's unfamiliar, but something in it pulls you. Later, you ask her what it means. She shrugs and says it's a song her grandmother taught her. About the stars, she says, and remembering who we are. And that's what remains. Not cities, not kings, not even the great stone monuments. What survives are the voices, the songs, the memories. The Maya people do not vanish. They adapt, they endure. Their calendar continues, their rituals reshape, their knowledge spreads, in clay figurines, in weaving patterns, in stories whispered to children under moonlight. Historians far in the future will marvel at what was lost. They will debate reasons. They will point to droughts and warfare, to overpopulation, to strained agriculture, to fractured politics. And they won't be wrong, but they will miss something deeper, something quiet. The Maya collapse was not just about failure, it was about transformation. Like a serpent shedding its skin, the civilization changed form. Not dead, just different. Scattered, decentralized. The towering temples became memory, but the people walked on. In the highlands of Guatemala, along the rivers of Chiapas, deep in the Yucatan beneath that same old sky, and somewhere, in a quiet hut by a sacred cenote, a boy is born. His parents name him for the wind. They mark the day with incense and chant, and as his cry rises through the canopy, the cycle begins again, not where it ended, but where it remembers. You travel again. Older now, the boy who once helped carve stone for temples has become the man who wanders among ruins, and there are many. You pass through once great cities, Bonampak, its murals now peeling, Yaxchilan, where tree roots crawl over doorways like fingers trying to hold the past in place. Everywhere you go, the same question lingers in the wind. How could something so vast, so advanced, simply dissolve? There are still those who remember pieces. A potter in a lakeside village speaks of a royal wedding her grandmother once described, when 3 kingdoms joined in alliance beneath a red eclipse. She remembers the songs, but not the names. The glyphs that once adorned every wall and stair are now symbols etched in dreams. Literacy, once the province of priest-kings and scribes trained since childhood, is fading. The old calendar dates remain, but their meanings slip. Like stars falling below the horizon, you meet a wandering priest, one of the last who still carries codices. He does not teach the way others do. He speaks in metaphors about fire, wind, and teeth in the earth. He says the collapse came not just from outside, but from within. That the kings forgot their role as caretakers and began to believe they were gods themselves. They fed the heavens, he says, but forgot to feed the people. You stay quiet, thinking of the sacrifices, the pyramids stacked higher with each generation. Each monument a promise, each promise a debt. The priest shows you a page from one of his books, carefully unwrapped from layers of bark paper and obsidian dust. It's a drawing of the world tree, its roots in the underworld, its trunk in the human world, its canopy among the stars. The Kaaba, he says. We used to believe it held the universe together. You ask if he still believes it. He shrugs. We planted too many temples, not enough trees. It stays with you, that phrase, like an echo of judgment. You begin to notice what was once invisible. The stripped hillsides, the sun-cracked fields, the silted rivers where the fish no longer come, and always, always, the abandoned terraces. Stone walls holding soil that no longer grows. In a village high in the hills, a woman tells you a story passed down from her mother's mother, about a time when the gods turned their backs and the people scattered, not in fear, but in understanding. We knew the gods were tired, she says, so we let them sleep. You realize now, the collapse was not a singular event. It was 1,000 small surrenders, 100 missed rains, 12 failed harvests, one city at a time falling into silence. No meteor, no invading horde, just the slow erosion of certainty, of trust, of faith in the systems meant to hold the world together, and yet the people did not vanish. They moved inland, they built smaller homes. They stopped building stelae, not because they forgot, but because they no longer needed to speak through stone. The rituals grew simpler, the language plainer, but the songs remained. You sit by a fire in a village by the sea. A young boy is singing. His voice cracks, uncertain. But the melody is familiar, a fragment from your own youth, from Calakmul, from the palace steps. You don't know how it survived. You don't ask. Some things, perhaps, are too old to forget. You close your eyes, and for a moment, beneath the stars that once charted the rise and fall of kings, you feel the weight of everything that came before. The grandeur, the hunger, the silence. And still, the music continues. Centuries pass. Jungles grow thick over stone, roots splitting what kings once carved. Cities fall into dreams. The names, Balaam, Carwheel, Lady Six Sky, vanish from lips and memory. The last codices are burned by hands that do not understand what they hold. The Spaniards come with swords and crosses, but they are not the ones who caused the collapse. They are only late arrivals to a world already changed. And yet, the Maya do not disappear. In the highlands of Guatemala, in the Yucatan hills, in small villages where Spanish remains a second language and maize still holds meaning, they remain. Not as ghosts, but as people, dignified, scarred, surviving. Time, like stone, wears away edges, but not essence. It's not until the 19th century that the world outside begins to remember. Foreign explorers, dressed in linen and arrogance, arrive with sketchbooks and notebooks. They walk through overgrown temples, astonished by what they call lost cities, blind to the fact that Maya people never left. They describe the ruins as abandoned, but ignore the children playing just beyond the vines. Still, they start to ask questions. Why did such advanced cities fall? Why were the temples left to the trees? And in their search for answers, they begin to unearth what the Maya had carried all along. Not in palaces, but in tradition, in textile patterns that echo ancient glyphs, in calendar rites passed from grandmother to grandson, in the way fields are planted with reverence, not just hunger. Then come the archaeologists, the epigraphers, the scientists with carbon dating and LiDAR scans. They begin to see what was long obscured, that the Maya collapse was not singular, not sudden, and not final. It happened in waves, city by city, century by century. Some cities rose even as others fell. Some endured. Some were reborn. They discover that the causes were many. Climate change, yes. A series of brutal droughts across the 8th and 9th centuries, breaking the delicate balance of rain-fed agriculture. Overpopulation, certainly. Too many mouths for land too thin. Deforestation as massive temple buildings stripped forests from hillsides, altering rainfall patterns. Political fragmentation, where once cohesive alliances shattered into bitter rivalries. And ideology, a rigid belief in divine kingship that could not adapt to a failing world. But no single blow collapsed the Maya. It was death by devotion, by tradition held too tightly, by systems too inflexible to bend when the skies changed. The kings kept promising order, kept raising pyramids higher, kept demanding more blood and maize, even as the world around them withered. And when belief broke, everything else followed. Yet today, in museums and excavation pits, something else rises. A growing understanding that the Maya were not lost. They were never lost. Their descendants walk modern roads, speak modern Spanish, but carry ancient pride. They still weave in patterns older than Christ. They still consult calendars older than clocks. You can find them in towns like Coban and San Cristobal, in tzotzil and Quechua words, in faces that look like the carvings on temple walls, and in quiet strength that refused to disappear even when the cities fell. One day, a young epigrapher holds a stone tablet. It's worn, the glyphs barely visible. But she reads it aloud, slowly, carefully. The words emerge from silence like embers from ash. It's not a prophecy. It's a name, a date, a king, a promise. And suddenly, the past is not gone. It's only sleeping, waiting for those who remember how to listen. You would think, standing atop a ruined pyramid with jungle stretching in all directions, that this is where the story ends. That these stones, broken and weathered, are the full extent of the Maya legacy. Mute reminders of a civilization swallowed by time. But if you listen carefully, not with your ears, but with patience, you'll begin to notice the story never really stopped. It simply changed form. Beneath those temples, beyond those walls, in the remote highlands and forested valleys, the Maya people continued to live. Not in the glory of royal courts or vast plazas, but in the rhythms of survival. They farmed, they prayed. They buried their dead with maize in the mouth and eyes on the stars, and through it all they remembered. Not always the glyphs, not always the kings, but the stories, the cycles, the land. Colonialism brought fire. Spanish missionaries burned the codices, calling them demonic. Soldiers forced conversions. Encomienda systems enslaved the population in their own homeland. But the Maya did not forget who they were. They carried identity not in stone, but in the body. In the way corn was planted, in the rituals before rain, in lullabies sung in ancient dialects. In some villages, people still refer to the Milky Way not as stars, but as the White Road, the Sakbi, same as the sacred causeways their ancestors once built. They still whisper to the hills, leave offerings by the ceiba tree, and speak of a balance between worlds. The sky, the earth, the underworld, all connected, all alive. This isn't nostalgia, it's resistance. In the modern era, being Maya has often meant being marginalized. Centuries after the collapse of their great cities, the people found themselves crushed again. This time, not by drought, but by politics. Governments labeled them backward. Landowners exploited their labor. In some regions, speaking a Mayan language was punished. Education systems erased indigenous history in favor of Spanish conquest and Catholic dogma. And still, they endured. In Chiapas, Guatemala, Belize, the Maya organized, not just as farmers, but as historians, poets, activists. They began reclaiming the narrative. Archaeology helped, yes, but the truest revival came from within. Maya intellectuals relearning glyphs, elders teaching native languages to children, communities demanding land rights based on ancestral presence that never truly left. In schools once forbidden to speak Kwekwe or Quiche, children now learn to write their names in syllabic glyphs as their ancestors once did. Calendars once banned are now published alongside the Gregorian. Priests who once buried their rituals are once again lighting incense and calling upon the gods of wind, maize, sun. You begin to understand something profound. The Maya didn't collapse. The cities collapsed. The kingship collapsed. The monumental architecture, the divine hierarchies, the imperial ambitions. Those are the things that shattered beneath the weight of their own perfection. But the people, the essence, the culture, it bent. It suffered, but it did not break. Maybe that's the real lesson of the collapse. Not that civilizations can fall, but that peoples can rise again. A civilization, after all, is not just what it builds. It's not just pyramids, palaces, or stone glyphs under jungle moss. It is language, memory, ritual. It is the way your grandmother grinds corn in the morning, the story your uncle tells by firelight, the prayer said before planting seeds. These are not relics. They are roots, and roots, even buried deep under centuries of silence, can find water again. Today, tourists walk among ruins like they're museums. They marvel at the carvings, at the acoustics of ball courts, at the engineering of observatories built to align with Venus. But some never notice the living Maya, the guides who speak both Spanish and Yucatec, the weavers whose patterns match the murals on ancient walls, the farmers whose fields still hug the curves of long-abandoned terraces. You do. You walk not just through history, but through continuation. And in that moment, something shifts. The great Maya collapse was never truly an end. It was a transformation, and beneath the surface of broken cities lies a culture still breathing, not in stone, but in stories, not in power, but in persistence. You sit now not in a jungle hut or stone plaza, but perhaps in a classroom, a museum, or a quiet corner of your own home, hearing, reading, wondering. You've seen the photographs, the soaring pyramids of Tikal, shrouded in mist, the great tombs of Palenque, the regal profile of Pakal captured forever in limestone. You may even have visited these places, climbed the steps, looked out over the canopy and whispered to yourself, how did this all disappear? But it didn't. The ruins tell one story, of grandeur and silence. But listen deeper, and you'll hear a different voice beneath the echoes. The Maya are not a chapter in a history book. They are a living people, speaking dozens of languages, holding ceremonies that mark the rising of Venus, just as they did over 1,000 years ago. Still, we ask, why did the classic Maya collapse? It's the question that obsesses scholars, fills books, inspires documentaries, and lingers in the minds of those who walk through overgrown cities whose stones seem too heavy to forget. And yet, the answer resists simplicity. Yes, there was drought. Pollen records taken from lake sediments show a dramatic reduction in moisture across the lowlands, especially during the 9th century. Tree ring data from the surrounding region confirms it. The rains failed, not for 1 year, but for many, in a civilization utterly dependent on seasonal balance. Yes, there was deforestation. Satellite scans and soil cores show widespread environmental stress. The Maya had cleared vast areas to make lime plaster for their cities, exposing fragile soil. Without trees to retain moisture, the land hardened. The rain, when it came, ran off instead of sinking in. The food system buckled. Yes, there was political instability. Hieroglyphic records depict increased warfare between city-states. Once ritualistic, now all-consuming. Entire dynasties disappear from the record. Glyphs, once devoted to astronomy or theology, become obsessed with conquest. Royal propaganda replaces cosmic wisdom. Yes, there were social fractures. The elite lived extravagantly even as rural populations struggled to survive. Construction projects continued even when food was scarce, temples rising like promises no one could afford to keep. When the kings failed to deliver rain, order, or answers, people walked away. But what makes the Maya collapse unique is not just its complexity, it's its quietness. No invading army burned the cities, no empire swept them into dust, no single day ended it. The fall came slowly, unevenly, like a tide withdrawing from the shore. Some cities held on longer than others. Some even thrived, while others fell. But eventually, the great networks unraveled. The calendar wheels kept turning, but the scribes stopped carving them in stone. And still, the people remained. When archaeologists speak of the Maya collapse, they do so cautiously now, not because they lack evidence, but because they have learned humility. Because collapse is not erasure, it is change. It is forgetting one thing and remembering another. It is the shift from monuments to memory, from empire to survival. And perhaps the greatest mistake we make is imagining that collapse is failure. But is it? Look again. The Maya were astronomers, mathematicians, architects, farmers, philosophers. They developed a writing system without influence from the old world. They mapped the heavens with astonishing precision. They built cities aligned to solstices, tracked eclipses, and lived by a calendar more sophisticated than anything Europe knew for centuries. And when the droughts came, when the kings fell, when the temples cracked, the people didn't vanish. They adapted, they decentralized, they changed their gods, their politics, their language, and they endured. Today, the Maya exist not as a shadow of the past, but as a testament to resilience. That, perhaps, is the real lesson of the Great Collapse, that civilizations are not machines that break. They are organisms that respond to stress. And sometimes, survival means letting go of power, of pride, of permanence. Sometimes, collapse is not the end of the world. It's the beginning of another one. You can't study the collapse of the Maya without eventually seeing a reflection. Not in the obsidian mirrors they once used for divination, but in your own world, your own cities, your own systems. It starts subtly, in the patterns. A civilization at its height, powerful and proud, building upward with ambition and belief. Grand architecture, complex bureaucracy, a deep faith in progress. The sense that the present is permanent, that the future will always unfold upward like a staircase carved from stone. That's how the classic Maya felt too. They had mapped the stars, organized society into intricate hierarchies, tamed the forest, and summoned harvests from thin soil. Their priests spoke to gods, their kings traced their bloodlines to the heavens, their cities pulsed with confidence. When the first signs of strain appeared, a missed rain, a failed crop, a restless vassal city, they didn't retreat. They doubled down. They built more temples, raised new monuments, demanded more tribute, more sacrifices, more certainty. Because when you believe your system is divine, the problem is never the system. It's the people within it, or the gods, or the enemies beyond the hills, anyone but the design itself. It's not hard to see the same instincts today. In our own time, we face droughts too, not just of water, but of trust, of meaning, of shared vision. We build towers of steel instead of limestone, flood the world with data instead of maize, but the core remains. We believe in growth, in the climb, in the permanence of the now. But the Maya teach us something harder. That collapse isn't loud, it's not cinematic. It doesn't come with a scream, but a whisper. The soil dries. The people leave. The temples stand silent, and the glyphs, once carved with ceremony and hope, are left unfinished. Even now, scholars debate the final stelae in cities like Copan or Dos Pilas. They ask, did the scribes know they were writing the last words? Did they sense the audience was gone? Did they pause, chisel in hand, and feel the silence pressing in. And what about us? Do we notice the silence is growing in our own systems, the cracks beneath the shine? The Maya collapse wasn't inevitable. It was a convergence of environment, politics, ideology, and hubris. And perhaps what's most haunting is that they knew. Not all of them, not in words we would recognize, but somewhere, in rituals that grew more desperate, in temples that rose higher but housed fewer priests, in wars fought for gods who no longer answered. They knew. But knowing isn't the same as changing. Not then, not now. And yet, there's hope in the Maya story too. Real hope. Not in the collapse, but in what followed. Because even after the cities fell, the jungle returned and the kings were forgotten. The people found a way to live, to plant, to pray, to carry knowledge in the body instead of stone. The Maya story doesn't end in ruin. It continues in resistance, in the grandmother teaching her granddaughter how to weave symbols older than conquest, in the ceremony held beneath the moon in a clearing far from tourism, in the quiet voice of a school child reciting both Spanish and Quiches. Neither of them perfect, both of them alive. And maybe that's what we need to understand most. Collapse is not a death. It is a transformation, a choice, even when it's made unconsciously, to let go of one world and begin another. So the question the Maya ask us is not, will you collapse? They already know the answer to that. The question is, what will you become afterward? The jungle has always been a patient god. It waits, green, silent, relentless, for empires to exhaust themselves, and when they do, it reclaims. It doesn't ask permission. Roots slide between stone blocks that once bore the names of kings. Vines curtain stairways once reserved for priests. Birds nest in the mouths of carved serpents. And still, the forest does not boast. It simply covers, softens, consumes, but it does not erase. Even in the deepest overgrowth, signs of the Maya endure. A piece of flint flaked just so. A pottery shard etched with the curl of a jaguar tail. A hill that is not a hill at all, but the buried bones of a forgotten temple. You begin to realize what collapsed was the illusion of permanence, not the culture. You travel to a town where the modern Maya still live by the calendar, not as relics, but as participants. They celebrate Wajakib Bats, the day of the sacred thread, the weaving of destiny, the renewal of time. On this day, women offer woven cloth to the earth. Men burn incense and speak the names of their ancestors. Children learn the positions of stars, not from textbooks, but from memory, passed hand to hand, voice to voice. You meet a man who teaches glyphs to teenagers in the mountains. He tells you he is not a linguist, not an academic. He just wants his people to read their own stones. For centuries, he says, we were told these words were dead, but our hands are still warm. He opens a book, not of paper, but of skin. His own forearm tattooed with symbols drawn from a stela near Copan. Each one tells a piece of his lineage. Each one reaches backward in time, not to mimic the past, but to meet it.
You don't speak. There's nothing to say. Later that night, you sit beneath the same sky the classic Maya once measured with mathematical obsession. The stars don't look like gods anymore. They look like questions. How much knowledge was lost when the cities fell? How many voices were silenced by conquest, disease, denial? What songs remain unremembered? And still, the silence is not empty. It carries rhythm, memory, pulse. A woman begins to chant. Not for you, not for tourists, not for history. She chants because the night is long and the world still needs balance. Her words rise through the trees, join the crickets, the wind, the flicker of fire. And in that moment, something ancient stirs. Not a revival, but a continuation, because the Maya never vanished. They adapted. They migrated from temples to terraces, from stone to skin, from glyph to grain. They shrank their footprint, not their voice. They carried the old world into the new one, tucked beneath woven belts, whispered in healing songs, spoken in maze rituals held beside modern roads. And though their kings are gone, their calendars broken, their steely crumbling beneath centuries of rain, their spirit walks on. It walks in silence, in ceremony, in survival. It walks every time a child is born and named with the guidance of the call cuage. Every time corn is planted with the four sacred colors. Every time a story begins with the words, in the time before the time. So when you ask, what really happened to the Maya? Look not at the stones, look at the people. They are still here, and they remember. There is a classroom near Lake Atitlan, small with cement walls and plastic chairs. The windows are open to the sound of birds and motorcycles. On the whiteboard is something remarkable. A sentence written in glyphs, not copied from a museum exhibit, but created by a 12-year-old girl who signs her name in Kakshikal. She stands beside it, pointing with pride. Each curve of the glyph a statement, we are still here, and we remember how to speak. You sit in the back of the room. The children are not noble scribes or priest astronomers. They wear jeans and t-shirts. But they are learning the same system once etched into stone 1,500 years ago, reborn not for spectacle, but for survival. Their teacher, a former farmer turned epigrapher, tells you he learned to read glyphs from copies smuggled from university libraries. The words were never lost, he says, only taken. Now they are being taken back. Across Mesoamerica, a new generation of Maya scholars is breathing life into what was once considered dead. They restore the script not as a puzzle for outsiders, but as inheritance. They chant the long count dates. They translate the myths of Popol Vuh into modern Mayan languages. They print calendars that track Venus as their ancestors did, not for faith alone, but for precision. It's not nostalgia. It's reconstruction, because history has not been kind to the Maya. After the classic collapse, they were fractured. After conquest, they were colonized. After independence, they were ignored. After civil war, they were massacred. But in every era, they adapted. And now they are reclaiming the stories others tried to write for them. In another village, you meet a sculptor. He carves stele not as replicas, but as new records. His tools are electric now, but his hand is steady. He's not building temples. He's carving birthdays, community victories, even poems, all in glyphic script. You ask him why. He looks up and says, because we have more to say. You nod. You walk among children who chant the 20 sacred day signs. Emix, Ik, Akbal, Kn, their voices rise like prayers but also like defiance. Not against gods but against forgetting. For centuries the world told them their ancestors were gone, their cities abandoned, their stories buried in vines and dust. But these children do not believe in extinction. They believe in roots, in cycles, in the fact that collapse is never the end of time, only the end of one time. A new Bacton has begun, and in it the Maya are not ruins, they are revival. And they are watching the world, just as they always have, not through cameras or satellites, but through the sky, the corn, the fire, and the voice of the elders. And when the rains fall, as they always do, eventually, they will plant again. They will carve again, and they will remember not just who they were, but who they are becoming. Time to the Maya was never a straight road. It was a wheel, a turning sky, a serpent swallowing its tail only to be reborn again. Every day was part of a pattern. Every life a repetition of something older, deeper, echoing from beneath the earth and above the stars. They didn't measure years and centuries like we do. They didn't believe in a final end. What we call collapse, they might have called a return. In the heart of their cosmology was the long count, a system that didn't just mark time, but embedded meaning into every moment. Their calendar could project forward or backward across thousands of years. Births, wars, droughts, even dreams, all were mapped against celestial rhythms, divine cycles, and unseen forces that moved through history like wind through maze. The Maya didn't fear endings. They expected them. In their sacred texts, even the gods themselves had collapses. The hero twins of the Popol Vuh descended into the underworld not to die, but to disrupt it. They were broken, tricked, defeated, and then reborn. Every sunrise in the Maya world was not taken for granted. It was a daily act of resurrection. The sun itself was seen as a god who traveled through the darkness each night and struggled back into light. So when the cities began to fall, when the glyphs stopped appearing, when the temples went quiet, was it collapse? Or was it transformation? A resetting of the cosmic order? You wonder if the people who left the great cities knew they were part of a larger rhythm. If they saw their migration not as failure, but as necessity, like the planting of a new field after one has gone fallow. In modern terms, we speak of systems breakdown, fragility, collapse. But to the Maya, this would be a transition, the turning of a great wheel. Today, we panic at the signs of decline. We see forests vanish, climates shift, towers crumble, and we whisper about the end of the world. But the Maya didn't see the world ending. They saw one world closing as another began. The 13th Bacton ended not in fire, but in a quiet sunrise and a new count. And what of us? What happens when we take their view of time seriously, not as myth, but as philosophy? Maybe we begin to see that collapse isn't about destruction. It's about realignment. Maybe we understand that nothing built lasts forever, but meaning can. That when the cycle turns, the ones who survive are not the ones who build the tallest towers, but the ones who remember how to plant, how to listen, how to endure. The Maya endured because they knew time was not their enemy. It was their teacher. And so they watched the stars not to escape this world but to live in rhythm with it. When Venus disappeared from the sky, they did not panic. They prepared. When the eclipse darkened the sun, they didn't flee. They made offerings. When the drought came, they remembered, this has happened before. And it will happen again. But life goes on. Always. So the next time you stand in front of a broken monument or see news of collapse in some distant place, remember the Maya. Remember that even great cities can fall gently. That memory survives in roots, in rituals, in songs. And that the wheel of time keeps turning not toward oblivion, but toward what comes after. The land remembers. More than scrolls, more than scribes, more than kings, the land holds the deepest memory. And for the Maya, the land was never just soil and stone. It was alive, it listened, it answered. Each mountain had a name, each river a spirit, each cave a doorway to the underworld. The great pyramids were not simply buildings. They were replicas of sacred mountains, artificial echoes of divine geography. To walk the city was to walk a cosmic map, where every step mirrored the path of the stars. So when the collapse came, it didn't just topple cities. It changed the conversation between people and place. The forests, once curated and carved, returned wild. Birds that had sung in palace gardens now nested in their ruins. Caves once used for royal rituals became forgotten mouths in the jungle, swallowing secrets. But the Maya never stopped listening. Not entirely. In hidden shrines and remote villages, the sacred sites remained. You walk with a guide who is not listed on any tour company website. She is a daykeeper, a spiritual elder, and she leads you into a cave near Uxmal. It is hot, dark, wet with breath and water. She lights a small candle, presses her hand to the stone, and begins to chant. It's not a performance. It's a conversation. You ask her later why the cave matters so much. Because it remembers us, she says. To the Maya, the collapse was not only an event of humans, but of spirits, a shift in the contract between the world above and the world below. When the kings lost favor, when the rituals faltered, when the forests were stripped bare, the spirits turned inward. They did not disappear. They waited. Even now, Maya farmers ask the earth before planting. Healers seek visions in dreams. Hunters make offerings at crossroads. Children are taught that disrespecting a hill or a spring may cause illness, not out of superstition, but of balance. A reminder that nothing is taken freely. Everything has a cost. And in these places, beneath the canopy, inside the stones, under layers of ash and time, the collapse is still unfolding, not as tragedy but as memory. Archaeologists find signs of abandonment, hearths gone cold, tools left unfinished, pathways overgrown. But they also find signs of reverence, caches of obsidian blades buried intentionally, altars left with the last meal, temples closed like a book gently shut. The Maya did not destroy their cities. They departed them. They sealed them like tombs, not out of fear but out of respect. Even now, elders speak of certain ruins with hesitation. Some places are not visited, not because they're dangerous, but because they are full of voices, of power, of stories that have not finished speaking. They are not dead cities. They are dreaming cities. And perhaps the Maya knew better than we do that some things must rest, that the world itself, like time, needs to breathe, that even the gods retreat when the earth grows tired. So they stepped back. Let the vines return. Let the stones grow moss. Let the silence settle over the plazas like mist. And in doing so, they created something else, something we're only beginning to understand. Not an end, but a pause, a long, sacred inhale, waiting for the next cycle to begin. History is rarely written by the ones who lived it. After the classic cities fell, after the Spanish burned the codices and renamed the gods, after centuries of silence thickened like moss across the jungles, the Maya still spoke, but few bothered to listen. Instead, they were turned into museum exhibits, mythologized into noble savages or mystical ancestors, their living presence treated as a footnote to the grandeur of their own ruins. But the Maya never agreed to be forgotten. They watched as outsiders walked through their ancestral cities with cameras and notebooks, pointing at glyphs they could not read, speculating about a people they assumed no longer existed. Tourists came looking for ghosts. But the Maya were never ghosts. They were farmers, midwives, storytellers, organizers, survivors. And eventually they began to speak louder. In the highlands of Guatemala, after decades of war and genocide, Maya communities emerged from the smoke with a clear message. We are not extinct, we are still here, and we will tell our own story now. Resistance was never new to the Maya. During the collapse, they resisted through migration. During colonization, through language. During enslavement, through ceremony held in secret. But in the modern world, resistance took new forms. Legal battles over land, revitalization of indigenous schools, revival of glyphic literacy. Maya radio stations broadcast in native languages. Indigenous scholars republished oral histories. And Maya poets writing in Kayich, Qxai, Yucatec, stood on stages and declared their identity not in apology, but in pride. You listen to one of these poets in a small town square. She speaks of corn and blood, of stars and erasure, of how her grandfather was beaten for speaking Caxical in a Spanish-only classroom. But she also speaks of revival, of planting the same seeds her ancestors did, of teaching her children the days of the Tzolk'in calendar, of reclaiming the stories buried in stone. This is not collapse. This is resurgence. You realize something profound. The Maya collapse was never truly about what ended. It was about who kept going anyway. While history books debated why the cities fell, Maya communities built new ones. Not of stone, but of solidarity. Not ruled by divine kings, but by elders and organizers. They reclaimed ancestral land, revived sacred festivals, and built schools where both astronomy and resistance are taught side by side. In Chiapas, the Zapatistas rose up with slogans in Spanish and in Tzotzil. In Belize and Guatemala, Maya activists organized around indigenous rights, climate justice, and cultural preservation. They formed councils, created constitutions, and told the world that the descendants of Tikal and Calakmul were not interested in being remembered only for their ruins. They wanted to be recognized for their resilience. Because collapse, as the Maya have proven again and again, is never the end of the line. It is the space between beats, between what was and what must come next. And in that space, the Maya are not waiting. They are rebuilding. they are renaming. They are rewriting the very history that tried to forget them. And so here we are, not in Calakmul, not in Tikal, not in the shadow of pyramids or the ruins of collapsed dynasties, but here in the present, in a world the Maya helped shape, whether we know it or not. Their stories still echo in the land, their time still measures the sky, their language still curls in the air like smoke from a fire never fully extinguished. What really happened? The cities fell, the kings failed, the climate turned, the systems broke, but the people remained. They did not fade into myth. They did not vanish into vines. They changed shape. They walked away from stone palaces and returned to the forest, to the cornfields, to the quiet places where memory could grow like maize, slowly, deliberately, in rows marked by the rhythm of stars and ancestors. The Maya collapse was not a single catastrophe. It was a slow unweaving of certainty. A civilization built on balance lost that balance, between earth and ambition, between water and fire, between people and power. And when that happened, the wheel turned. Not in vengeance, not in apocalypse, but in inevitability. And when it did, the Maya chose to survive. Today, they survive still, not only in ruins, but in language, ritual, and land. They are carving new glyphs, not into stone, but into identity. They are keeping time not just with calendars, but with ceremony, with silence, with resistance. They are telling stories, not of what was lost, but of what was never taken. So when we speak of collapse, let us do so with care. Let us remember that collapse is not a tombstone, it is a doorway. Let us remember that the Maya were never just their kings. They were and are the weavers, the farmers, the healers, the astronomers, the mothers who teach the names of stars to children born under skies no longer feared. And let us remember that every civilization, no matter how great, must one day ask the question, what happens after the fall? The Maya answered not with ruin but with roots, not with endings but with echoes. And in those echoes, if we listen closely, we might just hear the future waiting to be shaped by those wise enough to learn from the fall and strong enough to rise in its wake. Because the great Maya collapse was never the end. It was the beginning of something else.